Just trying to pick which one almost, and this is probably the most boring of the one, but I think when people do think of memory, they think about forgetting, and so what's known as transience, in that sense, basically forgetting. I mean, that's obviously a straightforward factor to look at, and that's basically to say, if we were trying to recount like what we did yesterday, or what we had for breakfast yesterday, it's easy to do now, 24. So I guess sorry, only 12 hours for you, but yeah, shorter after period. Whereas if a week later you're like, oh, what did I have for breakfast like a week ago? It's harder, or a year ago. And obviously, if it turns out like yesterday was your birthday, then you may be like, that was a significant birthday that may affect it. But so transience in general, it's going to say the further away from event is, the more likely you're going to forget it. And that's one of the advantages of the First Corinthians text, namely that it's one of the earliest texts we have. And so depending on how it's dated, you're talking about a couple decades, yet the creed, which you've already mentioned, 1 Corinthians, is something that Paul received and he passed on. And then, so he already told them, so such that if you like, the memory of it goes back to, a few years before 1 Corinthians, because he visited them. Yeah, and you could ask, like, when did he receive this? And there's no real universal consensus on anything, but on this date either. So within 2 decades is what we'd know. And I think Dale Allison's book, which came out earlier this year, sort of goes with that route. But the vast majority of scholars would say within a decade, and some, like I think it's James Dunn, says within 18 months. So you've got this very close to the event. That's to say, though, it still has to be remembered for another, if you put 18 months, it still has to be remembered for another sort of 18 years before it gets written down in 1 Corinthians. But in general, that's pretty close. And like, yeah, we couldn't remember what we had for breakfast 18 years ago, but this is just not like breakfast. This is like a life-changing event that you'd have to look at other factors, one of which is called flashbulb memory and like personal event memory, which is things like September 11th or other significant events. But yeah, in terms of just transience, I would say that actually this fares pretty well. And I guess because it's saying other documents, like even if you take the Gospel of Mark as conservative dating, are more likely 3 decades. So that's in a sense a bit worse off, or like other Gospels and stuff like that.
So this is super. I don't know why you call this boring, David, because I think this is super cool. Thinking about like forgetting, like so, like the idea is like we have this idea of like this creed keeps passing along. Like it's not like someone like they all just forgot the creed, which means like, well, maybe there's something like super significant that kind of happened like behind this creed in 1 Corinthians 15.
Yep, yeah, got you. So, and just a few things there, like you mentioned, it's not just, I guess, Paul's memory then. We're saying it's a memory of community and it would have been passed on. So it's not like Bart Ehrman in his book, Jesus Before the Gospels, is a bit on memory and orality. And he would use the telephone game of people sort of whispering things on to show how like unreliable it can be. But yeah, definitely other scholars, one of which I can think of recently would be Craig Keener's Christobiography. Talks about how it's more like a web. It's like a net, not a chain that's passed down, but like, yeah, it's sort of whole growing out. And so there's no one weak link in the chain. Rather, there's all the apostles, other disciples, Christians going around the place telling these sort of stories. So yeah, it'd be likely preserved.